Welcome to this week's GCN Tech Clinic, where we take your questions that you've been leaving in the comment section down below and do our very best to answer them. This week, I'm flying solo, so let's dive straight into the first comment. It's from @Hirisco100able. They say, what is the best tubeless sealant? Well, how long is a piece of string? There are loads of different options out there. Here at GCN and GCN Tech, we're supported by Silka, who make a natural latex-based sealant which has recycled carbon fibres inside it, which in my experience does a blooming good job of plugging up some holes because the carbon fibres all link together and form sort of like a mesh over the puncture site. But that's not to say there's not other options out there which are just as good. The thing that I say you need to look at is decide on what characteristic is most important to you. Is a sealant's ability to plug up punctures most important? Because if it is, maybe go down the natural latex route. And if you want longevity from your sealant, so it lasts as long as possible before drying up and needing replacing, maybe look to go down the synthetic latex route, and then it will last a bit longer, but at a slight cost and not being quite as effective at sealing up punctures. Right. Next question is from Nicholas Jung 4978. They say, hi Alex and Ollie, lately I keep getting chain drop when I'm backpedaling, even though it's just 1/2 of a turn. I notice it only happens when it's in big to big gears. This hasn't happened before until recently. When you're in the large chain ring and the large sprockets on the back of the cassette, this is when your chain is stretched at an angle the most, so therefore it's most likely for the chain to want to run off of the side of the chain rings. But if this has only happened more recently and isn't been a problem that you had before, I would say take a close look at all of the teeth on your chainring to make sure one of them hasn't become damaged and bent, because it's probably going to be one of them which is just making the chain run off to the side. Also worth double checking that your chain is all okay and you haven't got any sort of overly stiff links or any damage to the chain, but I think that is going to be a problem. And I have just had some bikes and some setups which really don't like being in the big cogs at the back and the big chainring, and the chain drops easily. So in those gears, avoid pedaling backwards. Okay. At Zippy UK next, they say, hey, Ollie and Bernard, is there a mechanical advantage for the body from being down on the drops, or is it just aero? They seem to find it easier to kick out more power on the drops, trying to work out if this is just because I'm going faster from being aero, or I'm subconsciously trying harder, or if there is a mechanical advantage to be had. So, let's think about this. When you are seeing some of the fastest pro riders in the world sprint into the finish line, everyone is using the drops. And that is for two reasons. Number one, like you suggested, it's more aerodynamic when you're trying to go as fast as possible. Number two, there is an advantage, I don't know, I would say mechanically, but in terms of efficiency for the body. You can get better control of the bike, you can anchor your body in tighter, and effectively it's strengthening that connection between your body and the bike, meaning less energy is wasted through movement, and it gives you the best control and ability to use the bike and handlebars as a lever to pull against when you're pushing down on the pedals. So it's like a twofold advantage, I'd say. You're locked into the bike better and it's more aero. Next question in is from Insane Comic Dude. What username? They say, why don't high-end group sets use 3x gear setups for a wider range of gearing? Is it less efficient or less aero? Typically, we see modern top-spec group sets with 2 chainrings at the front, or maybe even just one we've started to see become quite popular. Now, a 3x chainring setup at the front is not that common anymore because of a couple of different reasons. One, you've got the invention of bigger ratio cassettes at the back, meaning you can get the similar kind of gear range that you had from 3 chainrings just from 2 and using that wide cassette. And then also, if you have 3 chainrings at the front, each time you switch chainrings across, you're going to find yourself having the same gear options. So whilst you might have 3 at the front and, I don't know, 8, 9, 10 gears at the back, a lot of those gear ratios are going to cross over and be the same. So whilst you might think you've got, I don't know, 27 different gear ratio options, a lot of them are the same. So effectively, it's not really actually that helpful. Hence why we've seen the route go down to 2x and that wider range cassette. Next one is from Dex McCluskey 4832. Say, greetings, cycling mavens. Road cyclists go much faster than mountain bikers, and bigger brake rotors are more powerful than smaller ones. So why and mountain bike rotors going up to 220 millimeters, while road bikes typically have 140 mm rotors. Shouldn't it be the other way round? This is a good question. I'm going to say it comes down to two different factors. One, the way that you're applying the brakes when you're mountain biking is very different to road riding. You would probably have longer descents where you're working the brakes much, much harder. And then as an overall system, mountain bikes and mountain bike riders typically would tend to be a heavier overall system than a road bike setup. Therefore, the work and load that is going through the brake is therefore reduced. So that is why I think we see smaller brakes on road bikes, bigger brakes on mountain bikes. That's not to say there isn't an advantage still to be had for having big brakes on road bikes. I just don't necessarily think it's crucial to have. There's also the other element that as road riders, we're typically more focused on reducing the weight of our bikes and trying to make them as aerodynamic as possible. So a smaller rotor is better for aero, and it's also better for trying to reduce the weight. Right, next question in is from SNR 2001. They say, why does Shimano, etc. not sell dedicated chains for waxing that are pre-stripped from the factory? It seems pretty wasteful that all the grease chains they grease the chains so we can then spend more time and money degreasing them. I've thought this a number of times before. Now the grease that comes on the chains from the factory is more about like protecting the chains rather than trying to have them lubricated, ready for you to ride. Best practice, as I always say, is if you get a brand new chain, remove that factory grease, whether you are waxing the chain or whether you're just applying oil to it. Right, on to the next question. It's from Chris Jackson 2802. They say, over 10 years ago, I started using a double shift at the base of a climb when I would run out of gears whilst on the large chainring. I'd make a shift with both derailleurs, i.e. onto the small chainring, and then down the cassette in one smooth motion. Is that something I would recommend? And they say it makes the jump from the big ring down to the little chainring much smoother, and they've never heard anyone else talking about it. And they say they do this on Dura-Ace, Ultegra, and 105. Well, yeah, that is a thing. It's something I've done in the past, and it's something that you can easily do on mechanical shifting. Change into the small chainring, drop a couple of gears down the cassette, it kind of balances that gear ratio range out. But there is one big downside to this, and that is because you're shifting the chain at both ends of the system, it really increases the likelihood that your chain will drop off of the inner chainring and get stuck down and wedged in between the crankset and the frame, which is an absolute nightmare. Now, on modern electronic shifting, let's use Shimano for an example here, this feature and functionality is already programmed into the system, and you have the option to activate it if you want to, and it's something called synchro shift. And this will mean there's a couple of different ways of programming this. One of the ways is that as you make a front shift, electronically the front derailleur will shift down onto a smaller chainring, but then a split second after that front shift is done, it will compensate for that using 2 clicks down on the rear of the cassette. And then that's doing exactly the same process as what you're talking about, but instead of doing it at the same time, it's sort of staggered it ever so slightly in order to try and increase chain retention and reduce the risk of the chain falling off. And it's the same process for shifting from the small chainring up to the big chainring. The front derailleur will shift and then automatically it will go up the cassette 2 gears to compensate for that change in ratio. So it is a tech, it is a method and a process that I would recommend people try out, but just be cautious not to drop your chain. And clearly Shimano think it's an effective method too, hence why they've got it programmed into their electronic shifting from the factory setup. Right, on to our last question. They say, should the bike industry go back to basics? This is Joe Nelson 9041. A bicycle is a utilitarian vehicle, which is becoming more of a fashion accessory rather than an actual method of transport. Cycling for recreational use is great and everything, but surely we need to be going back to pushing for a better way to cycle around the country feeling safe, like our European neighbours seem to do so well. Yeah, I actually completely agree on this. I don't really know this is like a tech question, but I feel quite strongly, this is why I put it in. Cycling is great. I'm all for trying to promote cycling as much as possible, be that for a method of transport, to get yourself to work, use it for a bike that's really functional that you can go and do your shopping with, or simply just a bike to try and help keep people fit and healthy for longer. I don't want to necessarily see the bike used as a fashion accessory, but I can really appreciate the draw of that. So what I would say is what part of our responsibility and job here at GCN and GCN Tech is to really promote cycling in every positive way as best we possibly can. So that's why you see features that use cargo bikes, features that have race bikes, features that use budget bikes, so that we can try and tick the box for every single type of person and every single type of bike riding that's out there. There we go. Right, that draws this week's Tech Clinic to a close. Hope you found those answers helpful, and I say this every single week. I'm sorry if I didn't get to your question, but be persistent, put it in the comments section down below, and with any luck, I'll get to it in the coming weeks. Right, I'm out of here. See you later.